is that that's an explicitly nationalistic story from Ed Miliband, and that's been his consistent mode of argument in his contributions to this independence debate. It has always been under the surface: if you believe in Britain, vote no. I mean, which is obviously an intensely romantic nationalist argument. It's not a functionalist argument. It's not stay in the Union to help the working man in Leeds and Liverpool. It's an argument about feeling British.
Jamie?
Yeah, for what it's worth, the Labour left has never even attempted to respond to the argument about solidarity or from solidarity. If you believe that the interests of working class people in Glasgow and working class people in Liverpool correspond perfectly, then surely you'd concede that the interests of working class people in Glasgow and Liverpool correspond just as perfectly with the interests of working class people in Dublin and Paris. Yet they're not arguing for Ireland to rejoin the UK or the UK to become integrated into some huge European superstate. That frustrates me, actually, because they're hijacking socialist language to launch a defence of a profoundly reactionary and conservative institution, which is the British state.
I've just realised that we've been talking about a political party in conference week for about half an hour, and we haven't actually spoken to John Curtis yet. Is that legal?
It's comforting.
Okay. But anyway, I suppose that's quite a lot on the Labour Party, but we have to do another little one. I'm sorry. Did you see Truth Team this week? I suppose we'll come to Mr. Dick Hell on that. Truth Team or the Silly Squad or whatever I don't know. What do you think, Andrew?
I did. I rather liked it because I'm frivolous. And I quite like my American politics, and it reeks of this sort of political science, political strategy, political communications informed approaches to politics, which the Americans love and which people who are obsessed with it inevitably admire from this side of the Atlantic.
But does it sound that good if you say, I'm George Fulks and I approve this message?
Well, I mean, as an admirer of George Fulks's work throughout his presence in our parliament, and a great appreciator of his presence in sort of bringing levity to the lieges in this country, I think I'd be up for that. I think it's interesting in terms of what it tells us about the Americanization of politics and this sort of Obama mania, which extends still into these rather distant admiration for what we perceive as his tactics on the ground. I don't know whether it's particularly significant, but I quite enjoyed it. I think it might deface our politics attack ads, but I think they have their place, and the internet should be a bit awry, and one shouldn't complain when your opponents use similar strategies to what we've seen, nationalist bloggers, nationalist video makers using. So I think I welcome everything that adds a bit of lightness to the whole proceeding.
I'll come to Jamie on that in a minute, but Mr. Smith, as a Labour member, is that something that's filling you with hope and pride at the moment?
Well, all I could think is, what if the SNP starts another truth team and we have two corresponding versions of the truth, which is roughly where the referendum is right now anyway. I think the main thing about it is that I'm not sure it's going to appeal to anyone outside of party politics or anyone who hasn't already made their mind up. I think both campaigns have issues with that, and so far as avoiding preaching to the choir, but I can't think why any lay member of the public who hadn't already got a strong feeling on the referendum would ever visit that website.
And Jamie?
There was an Orwellian undertone to the whole Labour conference this weekend. Yesterday in a speech, Ed Miliband accused Alex Salmond of being a defender of the status quo. I do not know how he reconciles that with his defence of the status quo. I find the Truth Team initiative absolutely fascinating, and as a part-time student at Birkbeck University, which is where the Senate House at Birkbeck University was used as the Ministry of Truth in 1984, the John Hurt version of 1984. It was John Hurt, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it resonates with me on a profound level.
Does it maybe tell us this something about what I've characterised before as sort of social media bollocks? That both of the campaigns, because of the age in which we live, will be required to show some signs of being very online, some signs of life. And actually, it doesn't mean necessarily that these social media forums will have to connect with people. All it means is that if you can get all the folk that agree with you to tweet it manically and to pop it up on Facebook, then that somehow is reported as a great success and as a sign of your vitality, your youth, your connectedness to contemporary digital developments and all that kind of thing. So in the sense, you can't really avoid doing these kind of things if you're going to be an effective contemporary political campaign, because the press, being enamored of all of these shiny baubles and iPads and whatnot, will look at you and think, "My, you just look so old-fashioned. Where's the bling? Where's the shine? Where's the bloody iPad?"
Maybe I'm taking the whole thing too seriously, but I kind of worried about the Orwellian overtones of it. And did it speak to, we've often spoken about the kind of sense of entitlement that people feel that Scottish Labour have. They feel they're the party of government. And I just wonder if it spoke to that, we have the truth. Okay, maybe I'm taking it too seriously, but there's this idea, maybe they've just tried to think of a catchy name and they've chosen a bad one. It could be as simple as that, but I don't know. I worry about the kind of overtones of that.
I don't think it's so much about that. I think for me, it's not so much about believing what they're saying is true, because after all political outfits, no matter how much they fib and trim and tuck away the truth and finesse it, like all political parties do, and certainly like the SNP do. If you read their news releases, they're full of similar interesting strategies and framings of political problems. It's more for me significant in terms of an overall story which they're trying to tell about Alex Salmond and the SNP in general, which is that they're all a bunch of lying chancers. And we've seen that for the past year coming out of the Scottish Labour Party. So many stories about Scotland can't trust Salmond, he's a dubious character, and trying to work up that narrative. And I think the Truth Team phenomenon fits very nicely into that mode of trying to convince Scots that Salmond's a dubious character.
Yeah, well, I think that strategy stretches back much further than just a year. Robin McAlpine has a piece in the Scotsman today in which he says the Labour Party didn't get it in 2007, they didn't get it in 2011, they still don't get it now. Michael, as you suggest, that sense of entitlement to govern Scotland has not eroded with their electoral support. The Labour Party's lost votes at every single devolved election, and it still hasn't quite clicked with them that the traditional loyalties of Scottish voters are weakening all the time.
It seems to be that they think that if they just expose this chancer, then they'll be back on top and nothing's happened, everything back to normal.
Yeah, but it's I don't know. I mean, to defend them and say it's part of the ordinary political debate. I mean, you look at any debate which isn't about the Constitution. Listen to any proceedings in Westminster. Listen to Prime Minister's Question Time. Listen to the programmes on a Sunday morning. You get people accusing each other of being liars. I mean, I think all of those things that Robin was arguing in a very interesting and good Scotsman piece, I thought, and the references Jamie was making there are true. I think there is definitely a sense of Labour entitlement, but equally, I think it would be wrong to take that too far and sort of over egg the blame for them, and to sort of suggest that when they engage in the ordinary political tactics, which are not necessarily very attractive, that they're somehow engaging in a unique pathology.
You don't think there is something distinctive and specific about the Labour Party's fixation on Alex Salmond and on the SNP?
No, I do. I would think that's true. I would accept your points and the points that Robin made about that. What I'm saying is, I suppose, is that frame, while convincing in general terms, can sometimes be a bit overdone, and actually not everything is a manifestation of that. It's maybe a background music, but it's a bit like, to give you another example. I mean, the press often publishes things which are critical about the government, things that are done by the government. It carries independent opinions. It does all of these kind of things. It should do that. That makes sense. But the overarching narrative for many nationalists about a unionist press means that even actually very fair pieces, which are critical of things that the SNP are doing, get rejected, criticised in terms of this general story, which is, I think, quite plausible about a primarily unionist-inflected press in Scotland. So in the sense, I think sometimes these stories, maybe, despite their kind of essential truth, can be quite misleading as a guide to how we should interpret rather ordinary political strategy and ordinary holding of the government to account through the criticism of their work in the newspapers.
Andrew? Mr. Smith?
I think something which should be factored in is that it's because in part of the Labour Party simultaneously trying to fight two campaigns, one on the referendum and one which is more long-term about the elections in 2016 in Scotland. And I think there's two strategies. The two strategies have opposing objectives. In order to win the referendum, they merely need to maintain the support they currently have. Insofar as if everybody who currently supports a no vote votes no, then they will win. However, in order to gain support in 2016, they are going to have to actually bring in new voters. And I think there's tensions between the two strategies. And I think that there's an element of wishful thinking that if we win the referendum, it doesn't matter how we win it, the SNP will collapse into itself afterwards, fall into years of infighting, and then we will be in government. And I think there's an element of wishful thinking in there. But I think that the strategy of really targeting Salmond is, I think, about in trying to maintain support levels in the referendum rather than anything more long-term at the moment.
Because that was actually a point that came up nicely in that piece that you mentioned earlier, Jamie, by Robin McAlpine. Sorry, I was thinking of Maxwell. Yeah, Robin McAlpine. He made that point that actually the strategy for the Labour Party in the referendum and the strategy for the Labour Party in either the general election and particularly the Holyrood elections just totally diverges. And there doesn't actually, to me anyway, look much sign that they are thinking about that second fight, that fight for Holyrood very much. It seems to me that the Labour Party hasn't even really begun to make an argument for why it should be re-elected as the government of Scotland, whatever happens in the referendum in 2014.
And of course, the Labour Party has to be a wee bit careful of what it wishes for with regards to its Get Salmond campaign. Because who replaces Alex Salmond? Someone arguably, currently, more popular than him and more efficient in her crafting of a social democratic narrative to the independence debate. So I'm not sure the Labour Party's desire to get rid of Alex Salmond is going to serve it all that well if Salmond is swiftly replaced by Nicola Sturgeon.
Mr. Smith?
Well, I've got a question which I suppose is for other Andrew, which is that we've kind of debated what would happen to the Labour Party under a yes vote, but what do you think would happen to the SNP if there was a no vote? Would Sturgeon be the leader? Would there still be the same unity around message, or do you think that Lamont may have a point and that it may descend into some element of infighting? And there's always that cliche about the SNP being two parties in one. What do you think would happen?
It's an interesting and a good question, and a question which hasn't really been addressed by, I think, the mainstream political sphere, largely because you'd be lucky if you found any member of the SNP in Parliament, say, who'd be willing to give you an answer to that. I think it certainly is the case that the SNP is not an ideologically coherent party. Therefore, in some ways, you would expect it to have its splits, and there are geographic splits, but I think the ideological splits are the most important. Equally, though, politically, we're talking about a party which has power, which is obviously an intense attraction for any political party. And secondly, I suppose you have a party of independence which has succeeded in getting elected despite its perspective of independence, not because of it. And therefore, if we lose an independence referendum, then I don't think there's any necessary reason why we should expect the SNP to do badly in the 2016 election, because actually the allure of power and the sense of solidarity between everyone involved will be quite pronounced still, even after a defeat in 2014. That's my interpretation anyway.
I wouldn't underestimate the extent to which the SNP is these days a gradualist party. It sees the breakup of the British state as an incremental process and is quite willing, I suspect, to pursue devolution for another decade or longer if it feels as though that process will result in independence, which it almost certainly will eventually.
And there's also another point about what I was referring to earlier about the SNP being ideologically inconsistent, or to put it in perhaps a bit more positive ways, taking in different parts of political opinion and having internal tensions about which particular routes to pursue in policy. That's a feature not just of the Scottish National Party. It's not an aberration of nationalism. It's a feature of almost all middle and middle left or right political parties that you have these tensions. So in the sense, I wouldn't want to overstate the extent to which an SNP after defeat in 2014 would be suffering more significant pulls one way and another than actually many political parties do on the mainstream of European and North American